Isaiah delivered some of the most profound Messianic prophecies. In Isaiah 53, he speaks of a servant who would suffer for the sins of the people, bearing their iniquities and offering his life as an atoning sacrifice. Isaiah describes the servant as despised and rejected by men, yet through his wounds many would be healed. Although Isaiah may not have fully grasped the future significance, he captured a vivid picture of a Redeemer who would take on the suffering and sins of humanity, ultimately bringing healing and redemption. This prophecy pointed forward to Jesus, whose sacrificial death fulfilled this vision. Micah, another prophet during the time of Isaiah, spoke of a ruler who would come from Bethlehem, a seemingly insignificant town. Micah 5:2 states that out of Bethlehem would come a ruler whose origins are from of old, from ancient times. This prophecy pointed to a divinely appointed king who would lead God's people and bring them peace. The people of Micah's time likely saw this prophecy as a promise of political deliverance, yet it pointed to something far greater: the birth of Jesus, the eternal King who would reign over all. Zechariah prophesied after the return from exile and described a king who would come to Jerusalem, righteous and having salvation, gentle and riding on a donkey. Zechariah 9:9. This prophecy gave a unique picture of a humble Messiah, in contrast to the powerful military leaders of the time. Zechariah's words pointed forward to Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, when he rode on a donkey, fulfilling this prophecy in a way that showed his kingdom was one of peace and humility. Daniel's visions included a figure known as the Son of Man, who would come with authority, glory, and sovereign power, establishing an everlasting kingdom. This vision in Daniel 7:13-14 describes a Messiah who would have dominion over all nations and whose kingdom would never end. Though Daniel likely did not fully understand, this vision pointed to Jesus, who used the title Son of Man to reveal his divine authority and eternal kingship. Jeremiah prophesied about a new covenant in which God would write his law on people's hearts and forgive their sins. Jeremiah 31:31-34. This covenant would create a direct personal relationship between God and his people. Jeremiah likely saw this as a spiritual renewal for Israel, yet it was ultimately fulfilled in Jesus, whose death and resurrection established this new covenant, allowing believers to be reconciled to God. Each of these prophecies provided glimpses of God's plan to send a Messiah who would redeem and restore his people. Though the prophets may not have understood fully, these prophecies built a foundation of hope and anticipation that would later be realized in Jesus Christ. Applications. God's plan unfolds in stages. The Messianic prophecies remind us that God's plan of redemption was in motion long before Jesus' birth, showing his sovereignty and perfect timing. The mystery of prophecy. The prophets often didn't understand the full meaning of their own messages, reminding us to trust God's bigger picture, even when we can't see it all. The humility of the Messiah. Zechariah's image of a humble king on a donkey challenges us to embrace humility and peace, values central to Jesus' life and mission. Hope in a suffering Savior. Isaiah's vision of the suffering servant shows that true redemption often involves sacrifice, encouraging us to find strength in Jesus' example. God's covenant of the heart. Jeremiah's new covenant reminds us that God desires a personal relationship with his people, one that transforms us from within and brings us closer to him.